Hello and welcome back to Inside Interpreting. This is the very first Inside Interpreting conversation, and this is really special because we have two of my favourite guests that we've had on the channel already back together. On my left, as I'm recording this, we have Ebru Diriker. If you look up there, there should be a card with the previous video. There'll also be a link down there in the video description as well. I'm not going to do a big long introduction to Ebru because it's all in the video. Go see that card. Ebru is my favourite interpreting researcher on the planet. You'll find out why by the end of this video. And down there underneath me, if this is recording what I see, we have Rob Davidson, an expert on trends in the events industry. Rob's video was fantastic. Again, Rob's introduction is in the card above your head. The reason why I wanted to get Ebru and Rob together is the work that they're doing is incredibly connected. Ebru, as you know, is one of the people who really stirred up interpreters to think about the agency of interpreters, not the agencies who sometimes hire us, but agency in terms of our ability to make decisions that make a difference. And Rob is an expert in seeing what's going on in events and understanding really where that puts interpreters and where that puts the events industry as a whole. So if I can come to you first, Rob, could you tell us in a couple of sentences what the future of specifically international and interpreted events looks like from your point of view when we get back to meeting again?
When? That's the question everyone's asking, because there's no doubt that the international conference industry has been deeply wounded by the events of 2020, which everyone understands, and the problems of travel, the problems of bringing people together in large groups. But I think that today we need to proceed on the assumption that big meetings, international meetings, will return. Let's be hopeful about that. They will return in some shape. And I'm quite optimistic. I think that, when this is all over, there will be a greater need than ever for bringing together, especially medical meetings. There will be a lot for doctors, researchers to discuss, and that will fuel the demand for international meetings, and it will necessarily fuel the demand for interpreters' services. The other factor, I think, will be geopolitical considerations. Which countries have the geopolitical power? Which countries are sending representatives to conferences and needing interpreters? So there are different factors that will come into play.
With what Rob's saying about the future of events, what do you see the challenges are for interpreters to meet the demand for interpreting that's coming?
Certainly, Jonathan, you're right. It is a challenge for interpreters because COVID has actually made a more distant future real too quickly for, I think, anyone to adapt. All these Zoom meetings, video conferences, for conference interpreters especially, it has made them less visible, even less visible compared to normal settings where the booths had already made them somewhat invisible, and they also deprive the interpreter of certain very important contextual cues. My own research has looked into how the presence and performance of interpreters shapes a situation, and how the situational factors shapes the presence and performance of interpreters. So it has actually been a challenge for conference interpreters, but after all, the new environment is another contextual cue, has other contextual cues that the interpreters might in time master again, the way they did when they entered into the booths.
So, Ebru, I know with your work, you're really concentrated on, and you've really shown us the gap between what we say we do and what we actually do. How do we bridge that gap in a world where we've become increasingly invisible? We're now hidden behind another layer of screens. How do we change our own perspective and our own work to help us survive and thrive?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think very essential to our survival as professionals. First of all, we need to understand and take a more reflexive look at what we're doing, right? So the typical discourse on interpreting, the typical professional discourse on interpreting is very much one that says, you know, we never get involved, we do not get personally involved in what we say, we just understand the intention or the words spoken by a speaker and transfer those to another language. That is not really what we do, right? We actually, all conference interpreters, but also conference interpreters know that there is a lot of critical decision making, which goes into how you, first of all, make sense of a speaker in a given situation, and how you decide, sometimes very actively, sometimes more implicitly, to render this speaker in another language. I think we need to take a closer look at all the decisions we make that we tend to camouflage behind this professional, non-present interpreter discourse, because AI, and now fueled by remote settings, will be able to do the word-for-word transfer in routine settings. But what is the interpreter bringing into a setting? It's that aspect that we need to understand better. And I know from colleagues, it's very interesting, Jonathan, that when you ask them at a very decontextual level, what is it that you do? They give the answer which reflects the typical professional discourse of non-involvement, of this distance, but then ask them about anecdotes, ask them about interesting events, and then they start showing you the human dimension, the critical decision-making in situations. So I think we need to, first of all, understand this ourselves and agree with it internally so as to prompt a change in our overall professional discourse to the outside world, and even in training too, so both to the inside world and to the outside world.
Rob, were you familiar with, you've worked with interpreters, were you familiar with this thing of we just say what the person said, or were you more aware of this, whatever is called critical decision making?
No, to be honest, what Ebru just said, I found fascinating, and I would love to have heard that or to hear it again at a conference for the conference industry, where you have 2,000 conference organizers sitting in the auditorium, because every man and every woman in that auditorium would find that fascinating, those micro decisions that interpreters make to improve the quality of their delivery, and therefore improving the quality of the conference. I've been fortunate enough to be a speaker at several IAC conferences. I know I've always enjoyed them, but I have never been to a conference industry conference with an interpreter as a speaker, not in the booth, but on the stage, explaining, just as Ebru has done, and she has a lot more to say, I'm sure, about your role, the decisions you're making, the importance of choosing good interpreters, and the value that you add. We need to hear that. And even now, during COVID, there are still many online conferences for conference organizers. And why not volunteer to be a speaker at one of those? This is a message from your side, interpreters, which must be repeated and repeated over again.
This really brings me to a big question. That is, interpreting research, largely we've worked with cognitive psychologists, we've worked with neurologists, we've worked with linguists. Oh my goodness, have we worked with linguistics people? We've worked with a lot of specialists, but I don't know of any research in interpreting studies that has been done with the events management research community. Before we go into a couple of things at the end, Rob's given an idea of what he would like to see. Ebru, what would you like to see in terms of, if someone from the events management research thing came and said, I've got 1 million, choose your currency, but we need to do it as a joint research project. Which would you go, right, this is the project I would love to do with the events industry sector?
Yes, for instance, I would love to do a research on users, so listeners' perception and satisfaction with the various settings. That would be lovely. You know, if we had $1 million, I would certainly love to do that kind of research, which shows the outsiders the added value, if any, of a human interpreter, also in different settings, so remote versus on-site, because my own, you know, it's a small scope of things, considering the large industry, has shown that conference interpreters actually shape the conference setting in very subtle, indirect ways. For instance, up until now, they've been very active in talking to employers before conferences, right? And conference interpreters have also soothed down the anxiety of many conference organizers with their briefings. They've learned a lot from those briefings, but they've also changed how conference organizers organize their events. So those kind of subtle things, I'd like to see how this was practiced on site and how it's being practiced now in remote, because I have a feeling, just observational, some conference interpreters are adapting fast, and they're also shaping the events and how events unfold in remote settings. But again, we don't know what kind of expertise is needed, what is now precious, what is changing. So I'd love to understand that if I had a lot of funding available.
In general, not just interpreting, what do organisers look for in a conference? And what's the difference for an organizer between a supplier and a partner?
Okay, great. Well, organizers want their conferences to be a success. They want their conferences to achieve their objectives, whatever those objectives are, and it might be information, it might be teaching, it might be transfer of knowledge. They want happy delegates. They want delegates who will return next year and recommend the conference to other members of the association, for example. So they want satisfied participants. And these days, with technology, it's very simple to measure satisfaction, satisfaction with the venue, satisfaction with the catering, with the interpreters. That's a question which should be on those feedback forms, by the way. Something else organizers need to remember. You are regarded, as I said, as suppliers, but that's not a pejorative word. And I think that going back, Jonathan, to your great speech at the Ukraine Interpreters Conference, there you were very much speaking about marketing and selling the services of interpreters. Now, I think that many interpreters might not be aware of the concept of a convention bureau. And forgive me if I'm telling you what you know already, but every big city, Munich, Paris, Vienna, blah, blah, has a convention bureau. Now, I would say to interpreters, does your local convention bureau know about you? Are you on their list of suppliers? In many convention bureaus, it's possible to pay a sum of money to become a member. In that case, you are on the Convention Bureau website, you're on their list of suppliers. So when someone contacts the Convention Bureau from Miami because they're organizing a conference in Vienna for the first time, they will want the Convention Bureau to recommend venues, transport people, caterers, and interpreters. So I think that you need to reach out more to organizations like that, because they represent the city where you are based. And that would be a very positive step forward.
And how does that lead to, I know for some organizers, there's a big difference between the services they hire in and the people that they pay attention to for advice. I know some organizers who will pay, and I've come across organizers at events management conferences where they will say, you know, they spend a lot of time talking to the people in production and the people in lights and the people in this and that about how do we set this up for a great experience. How do you move interpreting into that bucket of, right, we need to talk to the interpreters about how we make this a great experience?
It's over to you to tell the organizers that this is what they need to do. The problem with your service, I'm afraid, is that it's invisible in more ways than once. You are invisible in your booths at the back of the room, but your service is speech, which is also invisible. Audio, visual, lighting, stage design, these are much more tangible things. But your service is invisible, but you need to be there. You need to be around the table with the set designers, the florists, and everyone else whose efforts make that conference a success.
How does that sound familiar from your research, Ebru, about this difference between some interpreters being partners and some being basically florists?
Yes, definitely. And I think I totally see what Rob is trying to tell us, and I agree. We need to get out of this shield of invisibility first as professionals. I know it protects us because it's always easier to say, we can render words and we can extract meanings from words and render that into another language. It's always more difficult to say, look, it's not that easy. We take a number of critical decisions every single time we open our mouths, with our intonation, with the shade of words that are available to us and the ones that we pick based on a given context. And it also, in a way, initially disturbs the organizers, right? As Rob, I think, was trying to tell us, we're part of this very large event and we need to be as unproblematic as possible, right? We need to not create trouble for already very complex types of events. But I think right after hearing the fact that we're not machines, we're not florists, that we need a certain setting and we can make it work as experts if we have the right kind of tools and settings available, then organizers start attaching importance to us. They start listening to us. That's been my experience, but I would love to hear what Rob would say if he heard an interpreter or an organizer of interpreters say, look, sorry, we make critical decisions. Are you okay with that? Or would he rather hear, we can always access meanings and render them to other languages because we're like machines in a way?
I would like to hear both. I'd love to be reassured that the message you are interpreting is going to be clear and accurate. But I think my respect, and that's a very important word, for the profession of interpreting would be enhanced if you spoke more about these micro decisions that you're making, the subtlety that you bring to the work that you do. I think that's a very powerful message. I'd like to hear that, as I've said, at conferences about conferences. But another thing I've noticed very often at conferences is that when it comes to the coffee breaks or the tea breaks, the interpreters stay in their booths. Now, I understand you're tired, you've been speaking, and my goodness me, how do you do it? I have no idea. Listening, thinking, speaking all at the same time. But come out of the box, go to the coffee area with some business cards, preferably, shake a few hands, tell people we're the interpreters, and you'll be surprised how interested people are, because their success as speakers and their enjoyment as participants depends on you. So get out of the box, go and have a coffee, network like crazy, and blow your own trumpet.
I'm just aware of how busy you both are. There's one last question that I'm going to ask to Rob, but Ebru, I want you to give me your experience from the other side. So Hedwig, who's a great fan of Inside Interpreting, has asked, if an event's online or hybrid, how do organisers choose their interpreters? What factors do they look for? So if I'm going to ask that to Rob, and I'm going to ask Ebru to give me, her experience from the other end, what factors seem to matter when it comes to getting hired?
I think, Hedwig, it's a great question, but I would emphasize trust. Organizers prefer to work with people, suppliers that they trust, that they've used before successfully, and interpreters who keep in touch with the organizers, who are top of mind when it comes to choosing interpreting services for a conference. Doing a good job, keeping them reminded of you, creates trust and creates repeat business. I think that's very, very important, because every time an organizer uses an interpreter for the first time, there's an element of risk there that they might not be as good as they say they are. So trust is important. That means that on your own websites, because very often conference organizers will go online to read about you before they even pick up the phone to speak to you. On your own websites, we need to see lots of good recommendations, testimonials from satisfied clients. Conference organizers like to see that their suppliers, whoever they are, have already provided excellent service to other conference organizers. And these days, with remote simultaneous interpreting, it matters much less, of course, where you are in the world. Location can be important. If you're going to be sitting in a booth at the back of the room, they will tend to look for local interpreters first.
And hey, does that chime with your experience, Ebru, and what it takes to get chosen?
Yes, I think Rob is right. And it's actually a message I should take home too, as a professional. You are very right, Rob. Some of us, at least, do like to stick around our booths, take our coffee inside the booth, and only socialize with our colleagues. That is really true. We really need to, and I'm sure some interpreters do it in an excellent way, but more of us should engage with the customers and with our listeners and show the human aspect, really. I think we just need to emphasize the human element. And Jonathan, you might really like a theory I've been reading about now, or maybe you know it already. It's the polyvagal theory. I don't know if
No,
you
not
took a
come
look
across
at
that one.
that. Stephen Porges, an interesting scholar, has looked at how humans actually co-regulate so the nervous system of human beings co-regulates when we are in the presence of others, which Zoom and other video conferencing equipment has sort of taken away from us. I think as interpreters, we need to remember that and get out of the booths for sure.
Both of you, thank you very much for a fascinating conversation. I was pleased at how much crossover there was. Thank you very much for being on the channel again. Thank you very much, and see you later.